in the end, we've got the type of agreement I like that's very much win-win, and in that it provides us with pathway forward for our bigger project, but preserves some protection for them in case there are portions of this that might have synergy with their operation nearby. And most importantly, they don't have ownership in us. They don't have a board seat. They don't have control of what we do. But we still have the benefit of interacting with them. They're technically sound group, provide us a lot of good ideas on things going forward. And they have a lot of operational experience in the area, which is pretty important.
All right, so welcome everybody, and thanks for tuning in as always. I have the pleasure of sitting down with John Black today, CEO of Regulus Resources. John, it's nice to have you back on the show. Good to see you, and how have you been keeping?
I've been doing well, John, and it's great to be back. It's always fun to catch up with you on our projects.
And I understand that we sent you a bunch of cold weather and snow. Have you been weathering that, no pun intended, okay, or?
Yeah, we enjoy these cold blasts you send from Canada down to our way. I'm in Denver here, but it's good. Put some snow in the mountains. So
yeah. So if you had a chance to go skiing at all?
A little bit this year. It's still kind of it's a bit different this year with the reservation system and things. So it's right. a lot of time here at home and a lot of Zoom time these days. That's how we're directing everything that we're working on.
Okay. Well, let's get into it because I have a number of things I want to talk to you about. Obviously, the big news, I think, let's start out with that. I think it's been about 10 days now since you put it out, but we haven't talked about it on this show. You put out some news that you've acquired some key property blocks from Goldfields, one to the north of your Anta Norte property and also some blocks to the east. We can bring it up here. Can you just share with us your thoughts, the viewers, on the, what should be the key takeaways and why did you make this deal?
Absolutely. This is something we've been quietly working on for quite some time since we entered into the project area. We've been interacting with Goldfields just as neighbors and operationally, but also working on them to see if we could convince them to let go of some ground they have in our project area. Just to refresh everyone's memory, the red claims on this diagram are claims that we own 100%. That was our first land position when we started on the project. And we have now 3 agreements that have collectively allowed us to consolidate and increase the size of our land position. So if we look on the left diagram, we see the red claims that were 100%. Our first agreement was with Coimalache, the joint venture that operates the Tantahuatay mine on our south side. And that produced, we can see an area right here where this dark gray shaded area around our claims is an area of interest where we share all data with the mine next door. And so that lets us see our mineralization in better context, and more importantly, lets us lay a pit back conceptually onto their ground to better report our resource. So it's a collaborative exploration agreement. We don't earn into their ground, they don't earn into our ground, but it allowed both of us to better understand what we have. We share the same deposit effectively. Our second agreement was with Kokirumi, which is the subsidiary of Buenaventura, and we have an option to earn in 70% in this large pink block to the north, with a typical clawback clause on that. So we earn 70% of that by drilling 7,500 meters, of which we're about halfway done right now. When we do that, they have a one-time option to claw back to them 70, us 30 by paying us US $9 million. So we would prefer 70%, but US $9 million isn't a bad alternative on that as well. And with those 2 agreements in place, it left us with one final piece to really get in here, because we had particularly this donut hole on the north, this area that we see right here. It was an important piece of ground that we wanted to get for 2 reasons. One is there's potential for mineralization to occur there. Our target that we're looking at, called Anta Norte, to extend our mineralization to the north, projects onto that ground. So we'd very much like to be able to explore that ground together with Goldfields. But it's also important for us to be able to conceptually lay our pit back onto it. So it was important for 2 reasons. One, potential for mineralization being there. 2, even if there's not mineralization on that ground, we need that space to project the eventual operation that we envision that'll come out of our project. Likewise, on the east side, down in this area, it was nice just to fill in all the holes around the reclaim blocks on this. So we're pretty excited. This is kind of the third agreement we needed to do it, which really sets us up now for in the future. The final stage on this is an eventual consolidation of the entire district.
So John, there is one little property here that looks there that looks like it's still outstanding. Who's the holder on that one?
That's a block called San Nicolas, and that's held by a consortium of local families that operate in the area. It's one that we're actively working on. It's a little bit complex in its ownership so they're not particularly in a position to be able to work. But your good point on here. We have a couple little pieces we'd still like to finish off here.
Okay. Well, I mean, when I saw the news, I was impressed. I thought it was obviously a good deal for Regulus. I remember when I first started looking at Regulus and Anta Norte specifically, that block to the north, I said, man, it would sure be nice to have that block to the north, because there's a lot of potential that you see there, obviously with a possible porphyry system. So it's nice to have that land to the north to be able to explore. Was there a lot of arm ringing that had to go in to get them to sign, or you said
we're actually we have a very good working relationship with Gold Fields. It's more just aligning our different interests. They view this ground, if there was mineralization found, it potentially could be feed for their Cerro Corona mill, which is 6 or 7 kilometers away, which will become hungry in the next few years. And so they wanted to structure an agreement that allowed them the ability to process mineralization that might be here in their mill. So we had to set it up that way. We were interested more in a bigger picture of having that layback potential for our bigger deposit to the south going forward. We wanted to be careful that they didn't have control over us or could direct how we explore. We needed to have autonomy and really be driving that. So it took us a little while to get it set up. It's slightly complex in that sense, but in the end, we've got the type of agreement I like that's very much win-win, and that it provides us with pathway forward for our bigger project, but preserves some protection for them in case there are portions of this that might have synergy with their operation nearby. And most importantly, they don't have ownership in us. They don't have a board seat. They don't have control of what we do. But we still have the benefit of interacting with them. They're technically sound group, provide us a lot of good ideas on things going forward. And they have a lot of operational experience in the area, which is pretty important.
Okay.
So probably one other key aspect of this agreement as well is that as we work on the project area, this expands the area that we'll be actively working into 2 surrounding communities. And these are communities that have been requesting more involvement from us, more employment, more interaction with us, more benefits from us. And this makes it a lot easier for us to work with them because we tend to try to link benefits that are provided to communities to actual work that we're doing going forward. So this gives us a much better basis for a working relationship with the surrounding communities as well. It increases the size of the project area.
Okay. So, I mean, some of this conversation, I think it leads me naturally to a question I wanted to discuss with you, and that's with respect to district consolidation. Your deposit is already large. Your neighbor to the south, Coimalache, is already very large as well. And this, it seems like this deposit is only going to get bigger. You're obviously, hopefully soon we'll be back at drilling and making it bigger. So can you walk us through, for viewers, the potential consolidation, how things could play out here? Because I'm assuming that this works ultimately in the end as one large project with one owner, whether that's a single company owning it or a consortium of companies together owning it. Can you walk us through some of the potential scenarios for how this all could play out, and who would be the big players? And maybe how does this Goldfields deal change things, if at all?
Okay, certainly. So essentially, our project, what we call the AntaKori project, is drilling out a large resource of copper gold sulfides that extends onto the ground to the south of us. So we see our claims in red, we see the mine ground to the south of us, and the open pit is in this area right now that's mining oxides. If we go to the next slide. This is a cross section and an oblique view of the surface. We're looking to the northwest on this diagram. So our ground tends to be on the right side or the north side of the diagram. And to the left side, we have the Coimalache joint venture, which operates the Tantahuatay mine. So the Tantahuatay mine, we can see the mine in the surface. I'll do the arrows here. So we can see the oxide mine right here on the surface. They're mining the oxide cap over a very large copper gold sulfide deposit, which lies underneath. We can show the deposit in colors on our side of the ground. This is the conceptual pit right here that constrains the resource that we reported in 2019. So just to refresh people's memory, in that resource, we have 250 million tons of indicated mineralization and another 267 million tons of inferred mineralization at an average grade of about a 0.7 copper equivalent. That's the mineralization that sits only on our ground within this conceptual pit. But it's easy to imagine that sulfide mineralization must extend to the left onto the Coimalache joint venture ground. They're mining the oxidized portion of that. So this is a heap leach operation that produces gold and silver from the oxidized portion. But they're essentially pre-stripping and preparing the pathway for an eventual transition to a larger copper gold sulfide deposit at depth. Their current resource, their resource that's most recently published, is over 900 million tons at a slightly lower grade than what we have. So you can see the combined resource between the two companies is very substantial moving forward. And it's essentially a brownfield situation where you have an operating oxide mine that runs out of ore in 5 years and a natural opportunity to make a transition into a larger copper gold sulfide. Either of us could probably operate a mine only on our ground and go forward that way. But we believe that there's a much better case for consolidation of the district to move forward at a larger project. And we think our ground's pretty essential to do that in the most economically attractive manner going forward. So there are a number of different ways this could play out. It could be that the neighbors decide to acquire us to consolidate it. It could be that someone assumes our position to become partners with them. The neighbors, it's a joint venture and it consists of 3 parties. It's Southern Peru Copper, which is Grupo Mexico's Peruvian subsidiary at 44%. It's Buenaventura at 40% and the current operator of the oxide mine, and a family company called Espro that has 16%. So those individual parties may choose to go forward or not within this context as well. So we're focusing on showing the mineralization on our site, increasing our hand at the poker table, if you will, and putting that forward and building the case why this has a great opportunity to move forward. And there, as I mentioned, there are a number of different ways this can play out as we see that final consolidation stage.
So with Goldfields, partnering with you, I suppose, is the right word here on the land. Could they potentially be a suitor here as well? Would they be in a position?
They certainly could be. They have their Cerro Corona operation, which is 7 kilometers to our southeast. And like Tantahuatay, Cerro Corona is quite a profitable mine. It's one of the better mines for Goldfields, but it has a relatively short mine life. They finish mining their pit in 2025. They'll continue to operate on low-grade stockpile for another 5 years. But the interesting dynamic in the district is that we have these 2 mines that have been quite profitable that have short mine lives now and face potential closure costs or transitioning into a larger copper gold sulfide. And so the obvious opportunity is for the immediate neighbors to be involved with that. But I'm sure Goldfields wouldn't mind somehow participating in that. And they would have a mill to offer into that scenario, a smaller mill, but a mill that could play into that. And so they certainly would make sense that they keep an eye on the district. But we're not restricted just to the parties that are operating the district. There are other operations that are nearby that could be interested in participating in this as well.
Yeah. What about like a Barrick or Newmont? I know they're gold focused, but there's obviously a lot of gold in this deposit, even though it's a copper gold deposit. But could they be like, this is a project that lends itself to a big company coming in, right? Like this is a big deposit.
It really does. You can see just between the mineralization that we report and the mineralization the neighbors report, there's over 1.4 billion tons of resource defined right now, and mineralization is very much open for both sides, both parties on this. So this deposit is already of the size to be of interest to a major. To put it in perspective on our mineralization, just on our side of the ground, it's copper dominant. It's 5 billion pounds of in situ copper, but it has 4.5 million ounces of gold and 100 million ounces of silver contained within that as well. So it's certainly of the size deposit that would attract the interest of the majors. And also to properly exploit a project like this, it really begs to be a large mine, which means a large capital cost to invest to develop that mine. So it starts to become a better fit for major mining companies. And what we're seeing is that the with gold price taking off a year ago, we're seeing copper make a nice run right now, but gold started quite some time ago. We've actually seen the gold companies be much more aggressive looking at opportunities, and most of them are fairly open that they wouldn't mind having some more exposure to copper as well, particularly if it has gold associated with it. And this is kind of a classic opportunity for a gold company to be involved in a copper deposit, or perhaps a large copper company and a large gold company working together to move forward.
Right.
Keep in mind, Yanacocha is only 35 kilometers to our southeast. And so that's the largest gold mine in South America, operated by Newmont with Buenaventura as the partner. And another interesting parallel to this is that they have largely exhausted their oxide resources. They've produced phenomenal amounts of gold for the last 2 decades, but they're in the process of evaluating making a transition to the underlying copper gold sulfide ores. So they're talking about the same transition at Yanacocha that we envision is logical to happen in the next few years here. And so they're slightly ahead and certainly familiar with this style of mineralization.
Okay, and with respect to maybe some things that could catalyze moves to consolidate further, or just more information to come together to combine these into one big deposit, is there anything coming out soon? Like I know you Regulus will be looking to do a mineral resource estimate update this year. What about on the Coimalache side?
Well, we can only say what's publicly announced on their side. We can't speak on their behalf because we have agreements in place. We are privileged to confidential data, but we can't go into that type of information on. But they have been increasingly indicating in their communications to the public their plans to make that transition to sulfides. And as time has gone along, they're talking about a larger and larger operation. They started out talking about 20,000 tons per day, and I think they're up to 60,000 tons per day on what they're talking about officially right now. So they're moving more in the direction of what we view as a logical size operation for the project altogether on it. So all the indications that they're sending to the market is that this is in the queue for them to go forward. It makes a lot of sense because when those oxides run out, you really want to be in a position to make that transition to sulfides. It's much more complicated to close a mine and then try to re-permit it to open back up than it is to just make that transition. And it's not just managing closure costs and things like that. It's the social impact it would have in the area. So ideally, for the benefit of all stakeholders in the area, it'd be nice to have this mine continue as a source of employment and benefits for the community, increase in size, and logically probably provide better benefits to the community, but make that transition and go forward. So it's there's really the timelines kind of set by the end of the oxide ores.
Mm-hmm. Are they looking to do a pre-feasibility study or a feasibility study on that project?
They discuss that frequently in their disclosure on their timelines, and I'll refer to their disclosure on that. But it's I think they're officially what they're working on is working towards that pre-feasibility now.
Okay, so I guess when that comes out, or if it comes out, that could be a potential catalyst too, to kind of see what they're looking at as well.
Yeah, and the catalyst from our side, as you mentioned, we since we put our resource out, we've drilled. Our resource was based on our phase 1 drill program, We've drilled another 18,000 meters since that time with some pretty exciting drill intercepts that we've encountered with that. And we're clearly pushing mineralization to the north on the right-hand side of the diagram we're looking at right now.
Right.
And so we would like to complete another, say, 10,000 meters to finish our phase 2 program. And we think that's a logical point at which to provide an update. We won't be done drilling the deposit off by any means at all, but it'll be a logical point when there'll be a substantial increase in the resource. We'd like to have that out by the end of this year. So the next catalyst for us is to see a second resource estimate to increase it, not the final resource estimate, but to show that size. And then both parties, both ourselves on our side of the property boundary and the neighbors on their side, can proceed to do a PEA from their own perspective. But what would be more interesting is to see what a PEA would look like on a consolidated project overall. But that requires some additional agreements between us in some manner to do that.
So when it comes to, again, viewing this as, potentially a consolidated one big deposit, one big resource, on the Regulus side of things, and right on this slide, I mean, you can see it. You're not allowed to share what your neighbor has to the south, but based on the data that's on here, you have better grades than they do. Would the Regulus side of the deposit lend itself, in your opinion, to a good, say, starter pit for the project to improve the the IRR and the economics of things?
The data that we see, the resources that are reported is just what's officially reported on here. There are a number of different ways to look at that in more detail. So I don't think that we have notably higher grade on our side of the project, but what we believe is that if you looked at it as a consolidated project, that our ground would be certainly where you would start mining on, and it would have to be involved in that. You wouldn't want to restrict yourself to one side of the property or the other side of the property only. It makes a lot more sense to view it as a consolidated project going forward. And an interesting point on our ground is on this slide. This is we can see the section line in the upper right-hand corner. So we're looking to the northeast on this section. Slicing through an angle that shows a little bit more of the mineralization in the pit on our ground. We always knew that this project had potential to have a large amount of mineralization and quite attractive grades to it. That's what drew us into the project to start with on it. But as we've put out the resource and taken a closer look at it, one of the things that's really jumped out to us is that perhaps more important than a lot of mineralization and good grade is that the mineralization has some of the better grades very close to the surface, and we have a remarkably low strip ratio. So this conceptual pit that constrains our resource, the strip ratio overall for that pit is 0.85, so less than 1-to-1, which would make it one of the lowest strip ratios for a large copper gold deposit that could potentially be developed. And there's even potential for that to go lower, because in some areas, if we look on the diagram right on this lower edge here, our data sharing agreement doesn't go that far out, so we have to treat all of that as waste. But that's drilled extensively by the neighbors, and we believe that to be mineralization. So I think if once you really start looking at this project, particularly in the early years, the strip ratio will be remarkably low, and we see a lot of the mineralization weighted towards the surface. So on the left side, we see the resource in 100-meter slices from the surface, and so we see the mineralization close to the surface and some of the better grades close to the surface. So that leads us to believe that it would be involved. A pit would naturally start on some of these better grade areas that are on our ground as well. So bottom line is that either party could probably operate on their own ground going forward without acquiring the other party, but it would make much more sense to consolidate the project and go forward. It'd be a much better return on investment for all parties that would be involved in that.
Okay. I do want to talk about a little bit of the deposit and how it formed, and I don't want to get, I guess, too deep into the weeds. And I know Regulus has already produced a good video. Kevin Heather, your chief geological officer, put it out, and I think it's quite good. And maybe I'll put a link to it in this video. But as a quick overview, can you go over the two distinct types of mineralization you have at AntaKori?
Yeah, that's an important thing for people to understand on this project. It's the project has two very different styles of mineralization, and in the lower parts of the project. Slide, we can see it on this diagram moving forward. The upper portion of the project in the light lime green color on this are Miocene volcanic rocks. And they overlie flat-lying or almost flat-lying Cretaceous sedimentary rocks, which are in the blues and the browns and the grays. And the blue and the brown unit in this area right here, along like this, are calcareous sedimentary rocks. So these are rocks that host skarn mineralization throughout much of Peru. Is famous for their very large skarn deposits like Las Bambas and Antamina. They're hosted in exactly this sequence of rocks. So when a porphyry copper intersects these calcareous sediments, it can produce skarn-style mineralization, and Peru hosts some of the biggest skarns in the world, actually. So the first style mineralization we see is in this these calcareous sedimentary rocks. Beneath our neighbor's property on the left side of this diagram, they're quite deep, but onto our property, they come close to the surface. They host copper gold mineralization, quite attractive grades, and it's a style of mineralization that's metallurgically easier. It's cleaner mineralization. It's more typical porphyry skarn style mineralization that we see in major operations. We see evidence that there is likely a porphyry driving this. In some of these dikes that cut up, we see mineralized porphyry fragments, but we have not yet hit the porphyry that's driving this. And we anticipate it's out there. We got some ideas. Our Anta Norte target is trying to zone in on this. So we believe there's more mineralization to be found. But then in the overlying Miocene volcanic rocks, these are much younger volcanic rocks, we also see extensive copper gold mineralization in these rocks, but it's a completely different style of mineralization. It's what we call high sulfidation epithermal mineralization. So it's characterized by a nargite pyrite instead of chalcopyrite pyrite. It's a slightly younger age of mineralization in this area. Very attractive copper gold grades to it, but it presents a metallurgical challenge in that because it's a nargite as the principal copper mineral, it's arsenical copper gold mineralization. This is exactly the same setting that is at Yanacocha that I mentioned, where Newmont's operating the Yanacocha mine. And to process this type of material, we need to look at ways to eliminate or reduce that arsenic as an issue on that. You can't produce a concentrate from this that you send straight to the smelter without excessive penalties. And so we're actively exploring different methods that we could use to go forward. What Newmont's proposing to do at Yanacocha is to put in a large autoclave, and most of the gold companies are familiar with that technology and comfortable with it. And it's a very good solution to tackle these arsenical gold sulfides. You essentially oxidize the ore and sequester the arsenic into scorodite, which is a stable, non-soluble form. A good way to sequester and preserve that arsenic in a way that it won't get into waters or anything in the area. So it's a fantastic way to process it. However, it requires a larger capital expenditure up front and higher operating costs. So to justify an autoclave or other types of pressure oxidation to go forward with this, what you really need to do is have a large amount of ore of quite good grade, and that's what we have. So it's important that people understand that approximately half the mineralization we have is arsenical and would require this additional treatment, whereas about half of the mineralization is more traditional copper gold mineralization that could produce a concentrate that would be marketable to a smelter.
And the higher grades are found in the high sulfidation epithermal, like in those volcanics with the higher arsenic content, as compared to the skarn, right? Even though the skarn
actually both styles of mineralization can have pretty good grades on it. Some of our more extreme grades are in the high sulfidation, but skarns, unlike porphyry tends to be a big homogeneous body of low to medium grade. Skarns can be quite high grade in sectors and more variable in their grades. So we see good grades in both skarn and high sulfidation mineralization.
Okay, so I mean your point there just sort of touched on a question I was going to ask. So I wanted to talk about the porphyry, or the interpreted porphyry to the north. If you were to find that, I guess one of my questions would be, how would you expect the grades to compare in that porphyry type mineralization as compared to, say, the skarn?
In a bulk sense, we probably anticipate they'd be pretty similar on this. As I mentioned, overall porphyries are more homogeneous and more constant grade, and perhaps a little bit lower. Skarns can have higher grade portions, but they're more variable in their grade, but they often bulk out at similar, maybe slightly higher grades in the skarns, but it's highly variable system to system on this. There are porphyries that are capable of producing very high grades as well. We don't until we find it, we don't know what the grades will be on this. Okay.
And I wanted to review as well the evidence you have to date, because, you know, of course, until you drill it, you don't know for sure. And the target is to the north at Anta Norte, but maybe reviewing, the donut hole center, right, is where you're expecting the porphyry. But you've come across quite a bit of compelling evidence so far to date, right, that maybe you could review, like, you know, you're hitting a lot of garnet mineralization, I believe, and you're getting some of the potassic alteration that you sometimes associate with starting to get closer to the original heat source. Can you maybe review some of these things, John?
Certainly. So the feature that we're interested in is this magnetic anomaly that we see that I'm outlining right now on the diagram. And this, we can represent this with different ways to process ground magnetic data, which is the data that we're seeing in color on this. It produces overall an anomaly that we consider as the Anta Norte anomaly that's about 1.5 kilometers by 1.5 kilometers in diameter. Interestingly enough, extending onto the goldfields ground, projected onto the goldfields ground in the north part of the diagram here. And all of this is potentially prospective. We believe this is the signature of a magmatic center, the intrusive center, that is the probable area that a porphyry is being placed into that's producing skarn in the calcareous sediments around it. So in a simplistic sense, we would think that there might be a porphyry in the center of this driving skarn mineralization around the outer margins of it. In detail, these porphyry centers are oftentimes a cluster of centers within it. It can be a little more complicated than that.
Right.
The high sulfidation mineralization, the edge of the volcanics comes along about like this. So the volcanics are here to the south and overlap this where we've been drilling to date. So we're drilling through the volcanics to get into the underlying skarn mineralization. And we've only tested about 1/4 of this anomaly to date. We're only able to drill up to this point so far. Let me undo these. So our drilling to date has been able to come up to this line. You can see our drill holes. So our resource is based on all of this. We can just drill the southern margin of this at depth. And we've launched holes out towards this from our current drilling. We were very excited at the beginning of 2020 because we just received our permit to be able to come up and test this portion. The overall project is AntaKori, but we call this the Anta Norte target area to the north of the project. We were set up to be able to drill that last March, and COVID hit, and we had to suspend that drilling, and we're able to start it in October. We're temporarily suspended a little bit right now, and we'll be back to drilling here shortly on this again. But our first 2 drill holes into this target area have confirmed that we see skarn-style mineralization and porphyry dikes. So we believe that we're on the right pathway, that this is the signature of the porphyry center that's likely driving most of the skarn-style mineralization. But we have quite a bit of drilling now to test this whole area. Not all of this will be mineralized. These first 2 holes, particularly 44, was pretty well mineralized. 45 is a little bit weaker. These holes are indicative that we're on the margin, and that's what we'd anticipate from where we're drilling, and that we should move towards the center portion of this deposit. Not when we see these big skarns that are driven by porphyry mineralization, occasionally all the mineralization reports to the skarn and the porphyry's low grade or not particularly productive. Sometimes the porphyry has all the mineralization, the skarn doesn't have much. What we notice in the really big systems like Antamina and Las Bambas is you tend to have mineralization in both styles.
So is there anything that you can interpret about the size and the sort of the strength of the system in the porphyry based on what you see in the skarn, how far the skarn projects, what kind of grades you get in the skarn, or is it too too early?
We can't be that precise, unfortunately, but we do see some clues in the skarn as we get more pierce points and begin to map it out. We can see that there's oftentimes zonation within a skarn. You move from more of a copper or copper gold center of the mineralization, and as you move outward, you begin to pick up lead zinc, and you get a lead zinc halo. So we can look at those elements to try to predict zonation on which direction we should go. But keep in mind there are overprinting systems that complicate that. So it works very well in small, simple systems in our experience. When you get into these really big ones, a lot of times the patterns get complicated, and there are multiple centers that overprint each other. So we have some ideas and some clues, but we're a long ways from getting it all solved.
Okay, but this drilling towards that center, John, once you're able to drill again, that will be kind of a priority for you, correct?
It will be on this. One of the reasons we started in this upper left corner in this area here is that we're drilling on Kulki-Rumi joint venture ground in this area, and so keep in mind that we have another 2 years to complete 7,500 meters to earn our 70% interest in that ground, and so we prioritize that early on is to start drilling there to complete that meterage as we move forward, and one consideration at the time too is we didn't want to tip our hand too much in the negotiation with Gold Fields by drilling down into the center part of the area here. But now that we late last year we announced a really important agreement that we made with Osisko that's related to royalties on the project that resulted in us being in a very nice financial position right now. So we have a little more flexibility. Part of the reason we were drilling on the Kulki-Rumi ground is that when we earn into that 70% interest, they have a clawback option, a one-time clawback, in which they can pay us $9 million to go to 70% them and 30% us. We think it's highly likely they would do that. And so we wanted to reach that goal to see if we receive that payment, and that would avoid a dilutive financing for us. We're a little bit less under the gun on that now because the Osisko investment into us puts us in a good financial position that we don't need to try to draw that $9 million in immediately. We'll still work towards completion of that, but I think when you see us start back up on drilling, you'll probably see us move at least one rig out towards the center. All the geologic information is telling us we should move that direction.
Okay. John, I wanted to switch gears here for a moment and talk about the project as a whole, maybe the bigger picture. AntaKori, Anta Norte is obviously a very large project. And I wanted to talk about the steps that you're taking to kind of get this sold. You've already done it in the past, Antares Minerals. So you've had the success in the past. You know what it takes to get a project sold. So can you sort of review with people the things that you're focusing on today that will, help improve the saleability of this down the road?
Okay, very, very good point. So Regulus is actually our second company under our same management team. Our predecessor company was called Antares Minerals, and with Antares we had the good fortune to discover the Hikira deposit in southern Peru. We drilled that deposit out and sold it to First Quantum. So that's our business model, is to identify an opportunity like this, to drill the deposit out and show the size and economic viability of it. And then an important component, a lot of times we think in terms of drill holes or tons or grades. As geologists, that's what we do and we really like. But an equally or perhaps even more important aspect of doing a project like this is de-risking the project. And that's showing that you can actually develop the mine. It's not sufficient just to have a large resource. You have to show that you have adequate water, power, the metallurgy is good, that you have social conditions that allow you to move the project forward. So there's a lot of additional work that has to happen. Our business model is that we invest a fair amount of our investors' money to show the size of this project, but then we're ideally asking a major company to spend quite a bit of money to buy us to be able to have an opportunity to develop the project. And you might ask, why don't they just take us out earlier? It's because they actually want to see us de-risk the project. They're willing to pay more to acquire the project, but they need to see the project de-risked. And so we find that it's incredibly important to identify the challenges that you have on the project and show that there are pathways to move forward. So a good example on this project is the metallurgy. That we do have arsenic. It's an issue that we need to confront on it. So we need to be able to geologically characterize where that arsenic is. We need to be able to show pathways forward on how you can process that mineralization and solve that issue. So each project has its own specific challenges as you move forward. And fundamentally, one of the important things is that we have a really strong database, that we're collecting all of the information to go forward on the project. When a major company takes a look at it, they want to see that you've got a very good, this is a good diagram you've pulled up for me here on this. This shows all of the steps that we go through. We won't go through those right now.
Yeah.
How we can collect our data, how we control our data. We're providing all of the information a major company needs to see and collecting in a manner that they're very comfortable with what we've done, so that they feel more comfortable to invest in the project going forward. So these are steps that are often overlooked by the public. It's a lot of detailed work that goes in it. And I'd make reference to a number of Kevin's presentations he's made where he shows the importance of the different aspects of this. One I can point out is there's a technology called Core Scan, which provides us with tremendous detail on the mineralogy of a deposit like this. It's not a cheap technique to use. It's a cost similar to what we invest in to get the metal analyses that we get for the project on this. But we've used Core Scan technology on every meter of drilling we've completed on the project. And I think we're one of the only projects, certainly in the hands of a junior, that's done that. That's incredibly valuable data to an eventual operator for the project.
So John, correct me if I'm wrong, but if a large operator came to say, okay, we want to take out Regulus, if you weren't doing this work now, they would have to kind of backtrack and fill in the gaps that you're currently completing to properly get the data to make themselves comfortable that they could make this work as a mine. Is that fair?
That's fair to say, and it doesn't mean that they wouldn't be willing to acquire it. It just gives them more comfort. It increases the value. It's a different way to add. The first way we add value is by finding a lot of good grade mineralization, but then we can add value by characterizing it well and providing all the information that someone would need to have confidence they can make a profitable mine out of it.
And I mean, this is, again, because this is such a big project, do you think it's important that you do this sort of, you're doing this ahead of time rather than as an afterthought?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is information that's best done as you're drilling the project out and showing the project. It provides comfort. Whenever we're drilling on a big project like this, it's natural that people are monitoring what we're doing. And so a typical pattern that we do on this is that we enter into confidentiality agreements with parties that want to monitor and go forward. It doesn't mean they're making an attempt to purchase us right now. It's a lot of times they're just watching to see what we're doing. And so we have a large number of CAs signed with a variety of different types of companies right now. And an interesting thing about this project is that it's of interest to the major mining companies, both gold and copper, just simply because of its size. It's one they have to keep an eye on and see what's going on with the project. But there are also a large number of groups that are interested in participating in a project like this, but they're not operators. And so they need a situation where they could have a percentage of the project, but they need somebody else to operate. So example of groups like that would be some of the Asian smelting companies. They oftentimes like to have participation, or large hedge funds even. And this is an opportunity that provides a chance for them to perhaps say acquire our interest, and they have natural operators on the other part of the project already. So it opens up the potential suitors for a project like this to a much larger group. The natural suitors are our neighbors next door, but we have to keep them honest by attracting interest from other parties. And this project, with the type numbers we've been putting out, and particularly with the metal prices we see today, it's a project that draws interest.
So John, I'm curious, in those CAs that you've signed, when some of the larger groups come and see, for example, this process flow sheet that you put together and your process, would you say that they're impressed or pretty happy with the amount of extra effort you're putting in?
We get positive feedback from that, and a lot of good discussions. They often share how they would do it and give us ideas on how we can improve. So I think we stand out as not just being a bunch of cowboy juniors that are just drilling away and hoping somebody buys it from us. They like to see the fundamental work we're putting into the projects. So.
Mm-hmm. And when you say that your experience in the past selling, a mine or a deposit, successfully before has helped, is that one of the reasons why you're doing things kind of this way and so thoroughly?
This was our philosophy from the start. And for those of you that know Kevin Heather, our Chief Geological Officer, he's an incredibly detailed person, and both of us have backgrounds working for major mining companies. We know what the mining companies need and to go forward with this. So that's how we decided to set things up when we formed Antares. And we were looking at other successful groups like, say, Ross Beatty's Lumina Copper companies that have done this multiple times before, and we have friends that work there, and we talked to them just on the approach, and it became very important or very evident to us that doing this style of an approach was essential to being able to have your project be ready for somebody to make the commitment to purchase on it. Having said that, going through the experience once with Antares, we learned a lot on it. I think we came in thinking the geology was the most important thing. We still believe that fundamentally the geology underpins everything on the project, right. But we understand now that most of the questions that start to come when somebody's really serious about this lean more towards engineering or social questions and things like that. And so that's when people are getting really serious about it, is when they're moving beyond the geology.
So you just brought it up. I was going to ask it anyway. Social aspect, obviously. Mm-hmm. You take over deposit, if you can't get it permitted and you can't get that social license, the buy-in from the community, that's going to be a major hurdle for, the potential acquirer. So maybe, I know Regulus does have a focus, and we've talked about this in previous interviews, that you really do put that focus on community engagement. And it's not just, you're looking down the road, right, in the future to, these relationships are very key, not just to be a good corporate citizen, but also for an acquiring company. They want to see that you have that good community relationships and that good social license, right?
Absolutely. And this project has presented some interesting challenges on it, partly because we're tucked right between two operating mines. And so each of those operating mines have their social programs and way of interacting with the communities. The good news is the communities in the area have gone through the experience of allowing two mines to be developed in their areas. It also means they've been through two rodeos, and they're pretty good negotiators right now. So they know how to ask for benefits and how to work with us and put some pressure on us for things. Right. And we have to kind of fit within that context. It's not like our previous project where we were the only ones for tens of kilometers around, and we had the whole show to ourselves. Here we have to coordinate with these other groups and these other expectations in the area. So a good example is we after waiting for a long time for our permits and then waiting for COVID to clear a little bit so we could start work in October, as we initiated our drilling in the new area to the north, we encountered a lot of interest from some of the surrounding communities seeking additional benefits or clarification on what we were doing. And we're right in the presidential election cycle right now in Peru. And so everything kind of blew up quickly in terms of having a lot of people that wanted to get a lot of information from us quickly. And we have to operate within COVID protocols right now, which restrict our densities and how we have people. So we chose to suspend our drilling in November to just take a bit of a pause and work with all the interested parties to sort things out on what benefits are for different areas and make sure people understand what we're doing forward. The whole thing was triggered because a group chose to they made allegations that we were contaminating a reservoir nearby as a way to perhaps seek compensation from us, and we're clearly not doing that. The reservoir is higher elevation in a different watershed than we're drilling. There's absolutely no way our drilling, but we've taken time to communicate that well to everybody and make sure everybody understands our drilling is not causing any contamination to the environment. And that our work program going forward does provide benefits, and those benefits naturally go towards the area the area of immediate work first, And then the surrounding communities can receive benefits from us as we expand the area of influence. But they can't receive more than the area where we have the direct impact. So we're working through that right now. I think we're getting quite close to being able to get our drill program back forward, but we want to make sure we get that right and that we don't insist on our right to drill at the expense of the longer term future of the project. We will be back to drilling. They're not suggesting that the mine doesn't operate next door or anything like that at all. It's really more of just better communication of what we're doing to a slightly broader audience than we've been working with before.
Right. And just for clarity, John, I believe you mentioned in the past that this project enjoys very strong local, like immediate in the vicinity local support, correct? And that this is just more, you're dealing with more of like outside political influences here.
It's a typical pattern we see in projects where in the immediate area, people see more benefits from the project. They're more likely to be employed by us or to have service contracts with us or be interested in selling surface ground to us. So there's a lot of transactional interaction with groups there. And so a lot of times people in the immediate project area are quite happy. Then you get a next ring out where people can see the project, but they don't receive as many benefits and they get a bit jealous and they want more. That's a normal process that we manage anyway on this. Where this one kind of escalated a little bit on us is that with these allegations of the contamination and us being in a political cycle right now when a lot of people are posturing to see what party they want to be associated or what office they might want to run for, it's natural that people kind of try to use it as a forum to express interest and ideas on this and draw attention politically. And so it was important for us to stop and make sure people understood that there was no basis for those allegations at all, and that our activity actually provides benefits for people in the area and demonstrate the support that we have in the area and make sure that we don't have outside voices that are dictating what's going on locally. Yeah. And at the same time, it was a good time for us to kind of catch our breath and take a look at it and map a little farther out in the future. We've been doing this anyway, but it's clear that we need to do that in a little farther out and interact with people slightly farther afield from the project. So I think we'll come out stronger for this, and the community relationships will come out stronger for this. But it's tough to be paused for a little bit, particularly with copper price running the way it is right now. But the situation doesn't jeopardize the principal part of the project or the concept we have going forward any means at all. And it's important that we get it right so that when we're back to drilling, it's sustainable drilling. We've got a lot of drilling to do. There's a potential for this deposit to grow quite a bit in size still. Yeah. So,
and it's not like you've been idle. I mean, while you've been idle, you've signed this deal with Goldfields, right? So things are progressing even as the drills aren't turning.
Absolutely, and we're on the ground. We're completing geologic mapping and remediation work and a lot of other things on the project as right. Well right now. It's just the drilling activity, which draws so much interest, is suspended for the moment.
Okay, so I want to get your take, or what are you hearing from some of your key institutional shareholders with respect to, say, this halt in drilling? Are they supportive of you? I mean, obviously everyone is anxious for the company to get back drilling, I'm assuming, but what kind of feedback have you had from some of your big shareholders? We're fortunate that one of our biggest shareholders is Route 1 out of San Francisco. They own about a quarter of the company. But they're similar to many of our other shareholders, whether they're an institutional shareholder or individuals that have been with us from all the way back in our previous company, is that they understand our model is for a long term on this. Everybody, including ourselves, are disappointed that we're not seeing as much of the rise that some of our peers are seeing with copper price going up right now. We'd love to be out of the penalty box, if you will, and drilling right now and producing good results. It'd be a fantastic market to be putting those into. But I think most of our shareholders are comfortable that this is a longer term play, and not that much longer term. I'd say we probably have realistically 1 to 2 years to when we've shown the good size of the project and when things begin to need to gel in the district to go forward on it, but that it's an end game play for us. And so most of our shareholders are patient. We're all looking over our shoulders wondering, could you be in something else that's shooting right now? But the fundamental value is there.
One of the things that we're noticing is that it started with a rise in gold price because people are aware we have a significant amount of gold in the project as a byproduct. But particularly with the copper price rise right now, is that we're seeing a lot of new inquiries from new investors. And particularly from the U.S. At time when the markets are down, we tend to be more Canadian investor focused, and now it's with this much of a bull run in the copper price, it's really picking up steam. So we're getting a lot of new inquiries, a lot of people that are identifying that the major copper companies have made quite a run right now, and one of the themes we're hearing is people taking profits off of those and cycling them back into earlier stage exploration stories is just a way to get better leverage coming up. So, and that's common when you see a commodity price spike or rise quickly like this. The ones that get the immediate impact first are the producers, and then it typically cascades down the chain on that. And if people look closely, they can see that we haven't benefited from all of that. That would be logical for us to benefit from. But when we're back to drilling, we're likely to catch up on that. So it's a great opportunity for those that are making a long bet on a good development opportunity like this to take a look at us right now.
Well, it's obviously encouraging to hear not only that your existing, shareholders, whether they're institutional or retail, are being patient and they kind of understand the sort of the end game here, but also that you're getting all this sort of new interest. That's got to be encouraging for you. I mean, the price has recovered nicely, still not back up to where you were before, but I have the chart up here. There's a very high correlation between, your share price and copper price right now. It's almost 1. So it's obviously very highly tied in with copper, but it's nice to see it moving in the right direction anyway.
Yep, and there's a lot of as we reveal the full potential of this and get back to producing data, I think you'll see a lot of interest drawn into it. Yeah. Important thing to mention is that for a project like this, we don't need high copper prices. A lot of times people think that you have to have that high copper price. We intentionally look for projects that would be economically viable at much lower copper or gold prices. But what happens is when we get into these sustained periods of higher metal prices, the mining companies begin to look towards development opportunities increasing. They're producing a lot of cash. They have the opportunity to invest. And we're in earnings seasons right now, so a lot of the major companies have put out earnings this week, and you see the headlines about talking about expanding existing operations or looking for new opportunities. So we're already making that switch into more of an M&A type environment.
Right.
So, that's the one in our process. We can control somewhat what projects we pick, and we can do our exploration work to move them forward. What we oftentimes can't control is the market timing on that. You want to be producing an opportunity like this into a hot market. And it looks to me right now that we're set up pretty well on this. I think we're just at the early stages. The copper price, like the gold price has been doing, will go up and down a bit now. But I think we're into a sustained period of elevated copper prices for the next few years, and that's perfect for us because we'll be delivering a property that'll be of interest to companies that are increasingly in a position that they'd like to acquire and develop something like this.
Yeah, and they'll be generating lots of certainly improved cash flow at these strong copper prices, and even if they correct significantly from where they are now, it's still going to be generating some really good cash flow. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, and then the market will do its typical panic if we drop 10 cents or euphoria if we go up 10 cents. But I mean, these are fantastic prices that we have right now.
Yeah, just incredible strength in copper prices. The last interview we had, John, we were talking about how strong it was, and it surprised everyone. And now it's like, I don't know, 60 cents higher a pound or something. It just continues to show so much strength. So anyway, maybe one last question. We've touched on it already, of course. It's the question everyone wants to know is when you'd be back to drilling soon. And I know you're not going to give any specific guidance, but from a ballpark estimate, are we looking at, say, weeks, not months? It's more shorter on that than certainly not months is the way we envision this right now.
it's not as simple as we have one agreement or one vote or one deadline that we have to do. What we have to do is be comfortable that a wide variety of parties that have interests this are happy with what we're doing and satisfied going forward. So when we reach that level that we think that we can start back up drilling and continue to drill hard in a sustained manner, we'll start it back up. But we're quite soon on that. One way to put it in perspective is we're not in a situation where we're waiting for the presidential elections to go. Once the presidential elections are done, it's logical to assume that we'll see a more stable political environment and it'll be easier to operate. First round of presidential elections are in April. We're not in a position where we're waiting for those to happen. We anticipate we'll be able to drill before then.
Okay, right on. Well, John, I appreciate your time as always. It was good to catch up. Congratulations on the Goldfields deal. I think it adds a lot of strength to an already strong project, and it's good to get your hands on that land. As we saw earlier, that Porphyry center does sort of project a little bit onto that ground. So it's good that you picked that up. So congratulations on that deal.
Thanks, and we're excited. It's indicative of our process going forward. This is a heck of a deposit we're working on. It is complex in the land situation and the geology, and it's taking us a little while to unravel this one, but patience will prevail on this.
Yeah. Okay. Well, sounds good, John. Until then, stay well, stay safe, and we'll look to catch up with you hopefully in the not too distant future.
Great, John. Yeah, I think we'll have a lot of interesting data rolling out this year, so it'll be good to catch up when we can. Thanks.
Okay. Take care.
Take care. Bye.